Let's ride. Out of the surging gas prices, which are actually, as it turns out, much worse in other countries. They're bad here. They're worse elsewhere. The latest numbers show that drivers in Britain are paying nearly twice as much as we are here. It costs more than $120 to fill up the average family car over there. And our Charlie Daggett has been talking to people in London who are telling him the cost of driving there is changing their lives.
If you think your pain at the pump hurts, spare a thought for London's infamous black cab drivers.
It's ridiculous. The price, it's ridiculous.
I'm retiring next year because of this reason, because of the fuel.
Fuel prices that are forcing extra overtime to make up losses.
Tell me another way I can make money, I'll go and do it.
And far worse than prices in the United States, nearly $9 a gallon and rising.
Gas prices here in the UK have been skyrocketing, increasing by the day, and there is no end in sight. It's got to the point where people are simply deciding they can't afford to drive anymore.
So, what exactly is to blame, and why should America?
10 seconds later.
Reasons here is that the UK and the EU as well have decided to stop importing Russian fuel, and that's going to push prices up.
However, the UK only directly imports around 6% of its oil from Russia. That's even less than the US imports. But the war in Ukraine and the international sanctions against Russia have caused a spike in global crude oil markets, plummeting supply, post-pandemic demand, more commuters and vacationers on the road, and expensive oil becomes expensive gas. If there is any silver lining, the crisis may serve as a time to rethink not only dependence on Russian fuel, but on carbon fuels in general.
Do we want to be incentivizing people to be spending on fuel, on kind of...
A few moments later.
Suspension of the federal gas tax. Let's say the relief in oil prices is not coming through. Then there's really pressure to extend it. And that leads to the other big argument against doing this, which is the federal gas tax actually pays for things. Specifically, it funds infrastructure projects on the federal level. This is a White House that has been trying to celebrate the bipartisan infrastructure law that the president signed last fall. And so you're essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul here. You're taking some relief here for consumers in the gas tax, but you're potentially sacrificing much-needed federal infrastructure projects.
So, Mike, we know last week President Biden wrote a letter to oil industry executives. He's calling on them to produce more crude in order to try and combat high prices. Those same executives were also invited to Washington by the Energy Secretary. So where do things stand? Will that meeting happen? And if so, what could come from it?
Yeah, we're expecting that meeting to take place Thursday. And it's really an interesting meeting when you think about this, because we know who the White House has really been blaming for the high price of gasoline. It's been Putin's price hike, right? The instability caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, leading to these higher prices. But increasingly, we're hearing the White House point the blame at energy companies as well. They're saying that the last time the crude oil price was this high, the actual price of gas at the pump was far lower. So essentially, they're accusing these oil companies of profiting on Russia's war and at the expense of the American consumer. You hear the president yesterday on the beach again talking about the fact that oil companies are not producing enough oil, that they have leases that they're not drilling on. They need to see more exploration, more drilling, more production of oil to get back to where they were pre-pandemic levels. All these things could help produce savings for the American consumer. Interestingly, the president said he would not be participating in this meeting, but let's see where things stand on Thursday. Maybe the president drops in. Sometimes this is what happens.
Speaking of things people spend money on, we know student loans are on the minds of millions of Americans. The president says he's nearing action on that front. Quickly here, what sort of options are on the table for the president?
Well, the deadline for a decision really here is August 31st. That's the last day of the moratorium the administration announced just a few months ago. This is really a number of cross-political pressures on this administration. Progressives, Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate, really have been pressing the president to forgive all student loan debt federal level. The president is really considering, according to our sources, about $10,000 in federal loan forgiveness. That would have potentially an income cap as well to only really help those at lower income levels. But there is political pressure, as I say, because there are a lot of Americans who have paid their student loans, who are paying their student tuition. And they say, why should others get a free ride when I'm essentially doing what I think is the right thing?
A lot of eyes on that decision right there. Mike Memoli, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Much later.
Under debate, not just among the president's critics in the Republican Party, but even among Democrats. We've heard some Democrats who are skeptical that this could actually work. They're skeptical, they say, that these oil companies and gas companies will actually pass on these savings to consumers. And that's coming from, the president's own party. And then, as you alluded to earlier, there's resistance among Republicans who say, look, this is a gimmick. This is something that is not going to work. What we really should be doing is expanding our drilling capacity and drilling for more oil in more places. And so the reality of this is it's not as if President Biden can just wave a magic wand and say, look, we are going to suspend this gas tax, because it'll have to go through Congress. It'll face challenges. This Congress has been gridlocked on a great many things. Democrats have the narrowest of majorities in the Senate. They have a narrow majority in the House. And given the resistance, even in the president's own party to this, it's a real open question about whether this can actually succeed.
And Sean, just to get back to some of the president's plans to battle these gas prices, he also said that gas rebate cards are on the table. How would that work exactly? Who would get them? How would they distribute them?
Yeah, that's another interesting idea that this White House has been looking at for some time. And it's unclear at this point exactly, one, if they're actually going to implement such a program, and two, how it would work. The idea behind such a program in general terms would be to have cards sent to Americans that they could use at the pump. And, in general, this kind of idea is something that has been embraced by strategists I've heard from in both parties, who say that whether it's paying for gas or other things, this is something where, look, American people receive something. It's a tangible benefit that they can use, that they can touch, that they can hold. But the challenges are in terms of distribution. How would this work? How quickly could you get this to the American people? How would you partner with gas stations to make sure that people could use these? How would you, what if any limitations would you put on them? So it's an idea that, in concept, in the big picture, sounds simple, but then in terms of actually deploying it around the country and getting it to people, it's a really, really complicated